All right, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about scaling and automation. And in this lesson specifically, I just want to share, some introductory thoughts around automation and really the pros and cons to it. So first, the pro of automation is pretty obvious. By automating parts of the outreach, you can just get a lot more volume out, and it also frees you up some time. But there are some other things to consider, before you really dive into it, and we're going to talk about if it really makes sense for your business or not, and if so, when. So we know that automation drastically increases your outreach, which should lead you to getting more booked calls and more leads. However, it also reduces your ability to personalize your message to that person, which leads to a lower reply rate. So the two can kind of balance each other out. If you're automating all of your outreach, then you don't really have the luxury of being able to personalize and customize the message to that person, which again isn't going to really help you with standing out, like if you were to personalize the message. So that's something very, very important to consider. That's really the main difference between doing it or not. But what I want to give you is kind of a checklist to see if you're ready to start automating some of the process. Now, first things first, do this all manually before you even think about automating it. I'd say do it for at least 6 weeks first because by doing it manually, you're going to really make sure you understand it and you're going to be able to get the hang of it and make sure that you have everything working well before you try to automate it and scale it up. Because ultimately, if you just try to automate and do more of something that's not working, you're just going to have, a bigger but more inefficient thing, right? So it's very important that, before you're actually automating the process and trying to scale up, that you have something that's working and you understand all the moving parts to it. So do it manually for at least 6 weeks. That would be the first point on the checklist. Second thing is make sure you've booked at least 10 qualified meetings before you try to automate anything. Because if you haven't, then you really haven't figured out your messaging and your targeting. And there's no point of trying to automate it and scale it up, right? Because again, all you're going to be doing is putting a bigger spotlight on something that's broken to begin with. So once you've booked at least 10 meetings, that's a pretty good point to know that you've validated your messaging, validated your targeting, and you kind of understand the process well enough to start introducing some automation to save you some time. Before you try to scale up and automate, you want to make sure you've really fine-tuned your messaging. The best way to tell if you've fine-tuned your messaging or not is, again, really the bullet point number 2, if you've booked at least 10 meetings. That's a good indicator that your messaging is working, and it might be time to start automating it to get more volume out. The fourth point on the checklist is to make sure that you're confident in building lists and getting your targeting down. Because again, when you're reaching out to someone manually, you can always look over their profile on LinkedIn or look at their website and verify yourself that this person could be a good fit and this might be a great company to work with. But when you're automating the process, all you're doing is building a list and putting it into a tool, so you're not really able to keep an eye on every single prospect you're reaching out to. So you got to make sure you're pretty confident in your list building abilities and your targeting strategies before you try to actually automate the whole process. But if you're building lists, to the point where at least 70% of the people on that list fit your ICP, then you're in pretty good shape and you can say that you have a pretty good handle on the targeting process. The fifth point on the checklist to see if automation makes sense for your business is that you're not in an extremely niche or an extremely small market. If you're targeting an industry where there's only like a couple thousand companies to begin with, there's no point of automating it, right? Because again, by doing it manually, you're going to have a higher response rate because you can verify each prospect is a good fit and you can personalize the message, which is going to help you get through to the person more. So ultimately, you get more out of your list when you do it manually. The whole point of automation is just to kind of help you get more volume. But if you're in a very niche market or if you're targeting an industry that's very, very, very small to begin with, then there's no point of automating it. You're just going to get through it pretty fast anyway. You might as well take the time to actually squeeze more juice out of it and do it manually to get a higher reply rate. And the last point of the checklist is that you're not reaching out to huge influencers or C-level executives at massive companies. Because like we talked about earlier in the course, the more important and the more influential and the more successful the person you're reaching out to is, the harder it's going to be to get through to them. And that's where personalization is really going to be your best friend. So like if I'm reaching out to someone that has a big podcast I want to speak on, or if I'm reaching out to someone that has a huge company and they probably get emailed all the time, I really am going to take the time to do some research and personalize my message so that I can get through to them and build a relationship that way. So again, don't automate this if you're reaching out to very, very important, hard to reach people. Whereas if you were reaching out to small business owners, that would be easier to get through and there's like millions of them, then automation would make more sense. But yeah, ultimately, it doesn't have to be an either or equation. I would really recommend you do both. Once you are ready for automation, once you've actually looked through this checklist and you say, hey, it makes sense for me to start, learning these tools to automate this, you could still do manual as well. So you can get your automation set up. But once it's set up, it's basically running in the background. You can still, on top of the automation, spend an hour or two a day doing outreach yourself to maybe your highest value prospects and personalizing those messages. So you can definitely have a good mix of manual and automation, and I would definitely recommend. But ultimately, start off with manual, get the hang of it, follow the checklist. when you want to start automating the process, get that set up, get the hang of it, but keep doing both. That's really the best way you can get the most out of your time doing your cold outreach. And that's really it. I hope that helps you wrap your head around the process a little bit more and understand, if you're ready or not to actually start automating the process. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.